Movies are supposed to entertain you, not send people screaming from theaters, storming the streets, or calling in government censors. But history proves some films went way beyond the screen and straight into chaos. What kind of movie makes people faint, riot, or demand official bans? Sometimes it's violence, sometimes politics, and sometimes it's just too far ahead of its time. Buckle up because we're diving into 15 classics that didn't just play, they detonated. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. When D.W. Griffith released The Birth of a Nation, it wasn't just another silent epic, it was a cultural bomb. Technically, the film was revolutionary. Griffith's editing techniques shaped how movies would be made for the next century. But the content? That's where the storm began. The film glorified a certain group while demeaning African Americans, and the reaction was explosive. Audiences didn't just leave theaters disturbed. They organized, they protested, and in many cities, riots broke out. The NAACP fought hard against the movie, warning officials it would inflame racial tension, and they were right. Cities like Boston and Philadelphia saw demonstrations outside theaters that sometimes turned violent. Some local governments even tried banning it outright, sparking debates about free expression versus public safety. Here's the paradox. While the film was hailed in Hollywood for its technical mastery, in communities across America, it became a symbol of hate. Griffith may have changed cinema forever, but he also ignited a firestorm that made the movie more infamous than celebrated. In the end, The Birth of a Nation proved that movies aren't just art. They can be dangerous when they weaponize stereotypes. It left behind two legacies: the birth of modern cinema and one of the ugliest controversies the industry has ever known. Battleship Potemkin, 1925. Imagine a film so powerful that entire governments feared it might trigger revolutions. That was Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin. On the surface, it told the story of a naval mutiny in 1905, but through Eisenstein's groundbreaking montage editing, it became a rallying cry for uprising. The famous Odessa steppe sequence, soldiers firing on unarmed civilians, left audiences shaken. The editing was rapid, shocking, and unlike anything people had ever seen. But that brilliance came at a price. Governments across Europe feared the film's influence. In the UK, France, and Germany, officials banned it for decades, convinced it would inspire working-class unrest. Police even raided screenings and confiscated film reels mid-show. Despite all that, whispers about the movie spread. Underground screenings drew passionate audiences, some of whom left theaters ready to march in the streets. In several cases, these gatherings ended in riots, not because of what was happening in the world, but because of what was happening on the screen. The irony is that Eisenstein's work was intended as propaganda, but it became much more than that. It proved that cinema could rally, provoke, and terrify political leaders. Today, critics rank Battleship Potemkin as one of the greatest films ever made, but in its day, it was less movie night and more potential revolution in a canister. Freaks, 1932. If there's one movie that demonstrates how far a crowd's tolerance can be pushed, it's Todd Browning's Freaks. MGM thought they were getting another horror movie from the director of Dracula. What they got was something so shocking that audiences bolted from theaters. The movie featured real carnival performers with disabilities, and that decision alone unsettled viewers. But Browning didn't hold back. The story of betrayal, revenge, and unity among sideshow performers built to a finale so disturbing that many couldn't even watch it. Reports flooded in of fainting, vomiting, and mass walkouts. Public backlash was brutal. MGM cut more than 30 minutes of footage just to make it releasable, but even then, it didn't calm the outrage. Several cities banned it outright, and in the United Kingdom, the ban lasted for more than 30 years. Instead of boosting his career, Browning's reputation never recovered. Looking back now, Freaks is hailed as a cult masterpiece, admired for its boldness and empathy toward its characters. But in 1932, it was treated like a threat. The tagline should have been simple: forget your popcorn, you won't keep it down. L'Âge d'Or, 1930. Surrealism isn't supposed to be polite, and Luis Buñuel proved that in L'Âge d'Or. Teaming up with Salvador Dali, Buñuel crafted a movie packed with dreamlike images, bizarre juxtapositions, and a direct attack on polite society. The result? Audiences didn't just walk out, they rioted. At its Paris premiere, the surreal sequences mocking authority and social norms enraged conservative groups. Right-wing protesters stormed the theater, vandalized artworks in the lobby, and even assaulted audience members. Chaos spilled into the streets, and French authorities stepped in, banning the film entirely. What's wild is that Buñuel and Dali probably expected this. Surrealism thrived on shock, and the uproar only solidified the film's legendary status. But for the crowd that night, it wasn't avant-garde. It was a declaration of war on their values. Decades later, L'Âge d'Or is studied as a milestone in film history, but its legacy is forever tied to the night when a movie screening turned into a street brawl. It was art as protest, and the audience's fury proved just how powerful cinema could be when it hits the nerve of a culture not ready to be challenged. The Great Dictator, 1940. Charlie Chaplin wasn't known for controversy. He was the beloved tramp, the king of silent comedy. But when he released The Great Dictator, everything changed. It was his first talkie, and instead of a light comedy, it was a razor-sharp political satire. He directly mocked Adolf Hitler at a time when the world was teetering on the edge of war. The film was banned in Nazi Germany, Italy, and several South American countries with pro-fascist leanings, but it wasn't just bans. Screenings in certain cities drew riots from sympathizers furious at Chaplin's bold mockery. Police had to intervene more than once to control violent outbursts outside theaters. In the US, the movie divided audiences. Many hailed it as brave, but others criticized Chaplin for stepping out of his lane as a comedian. The final speech, a heartfelt plea for humanity, left some applauding, while others accused him of propaganda. In the end, Chaplin's gamble worked. The film was a success, but the controversy proved how dangerous comedy could be when aimed directly at a dictator. The Great Dictator wasn't just a movie. It was a political statement that sparked fights, bans, and some of the most heated reactions of Chaplin's career. Chien Andalou, 1929. Before L'Âge d'Or sparked riots, Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali tested the waters with Chien Andalou, a short film that practically redefined the word shock. Imagine sitting in a theater in 1929, expecting some experimental art, and the first thing you see is a razor slicing across a human eye. Audiences didn't just squirm, they panicked. At the Paris premiere, viewers screamed, fainted, or rushed out in disgust. Some hurled insults at the screen, while others tried to pick fights in the aisles. Surrealists in the crowd loved it, but the general public? Not so much. The film's dreamlike structure made no sense to conventional audiences, and the imagery was so jarring, it felt like an attack. Buñuel himself reportedly brought rocks in his pockets to throw at potential rioters, expecting the worst. That's how certain he was that his film would cause chaos. And while he didn't need to defend himself physically that night, the reaction made clear this wasn't ordinary cinema, it was a confrontation. Over the years, Chien Andalou has been celebrated as a surrealist masterpiece, a bold rejection of narrative rules and an unapologetic assault on audience comfort. But in 1929, it wasn't just avant-garde, it was nightmare fuel that had people stumbling into the streets, desperate for fresh air and relief from imagery they'd never forget. The Outlaw, 1943. Howard Hughes was a master of publicity, and with The Outlaw, he proved it. On paper, it was a Western about Billy the Kid. In practice, it became one of the most scandalous movies of the 1940s. Why? Jane Russell. Or more specifically, how Hughes filmed her. The movie's heavy emphasis on Russell's figure was front and center in both the cinematography and the ad campaign. Audiences expecting a dusty cowboy flick instead got a movie that leaned hard into physical display. Crowds were outraged, and church groups immediately protested. In some towns, theaters faced mobs demanding the film be pulled. Walkouts were constant, and officials debated whether it was too indecent to be shown at all. Government boards got involved, leading to years of censorship battles. Hughes, of course, leaned into the chaos, turning the scandal into free marketing. Every protest and every ban only made the film more talked about. Russell, who was barely known before, became an overnight star, though she admitted she wasn't thrilled about how it happened. In the end, The Outlaw proved that scandal sells, but at a cost. It was less about cowboys and more about controversy, and it taught Hollywood a lesson that would be repeated for decades. If you want headlines, give the public something to riot about. The Exorcist 1973. When The Exorcist hit theaters in 1973, audiences weren't ready. People didn't just walk out, they ran. Reports poured in from across the US and Europe, fainting, vomiting, ambulances parked outside theaters. Some cinemas even hired medical staff to deal with overwhelmed viewers. It was pandemonium. William Friedkin's horror about a young girl's terrifying possession combined cutting-edge effects with a mood so oppressive that even seasoned moviegoers couldn't handle it. Theater managers talked about cleaning up after mass panic. News outlets ran stories about people collapsing in the aisles. It didn't take long before certain towns banned the film outright, claiming it was too disturbing for public safety. The backlash was so intense that officials in the UK stepped in, barring it from home video release for years. Meanwhile, religious leaders worldwide decried it as corrupting, which ironically only made more people want to see it. Despite, or maybe because of, the chaos, The Exorcist became one of the biggest hits of all time. Audiences couldn't resist testing their limits, but make no mistake, this wasn't just a movie, it was an ordeal. And if you sat through the whole thing without flinching, you earned bragging rights that people are still talking about half a century later. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. Silent German expressionism doesn't sound like the kind of cinema to cause a riot, but the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari did more than unsettle. It worried governments. Robert Wiener's twisted sets, distorted perspectives, and themes of authoritarian control made it one of the strangest films of its time. Audiences expecting traditional drama were blindsided. Some viewers were hypnotized by the surreal style. Others were disturbed by the story of a mad doctor manipulating a sleepwalker into committing crimes. But beyond the audience reaction, political leaders feared something bigger. The film's subtext about blind obedience and tyranny struck a nerve in Weimar Germany, where instability was already running high. Right-wing groups attacked the film as subversive propaganda, while progressive groups embraced it as a warning. In certain cities, screenings led to loud public debates that spilled into chaos outside theaters. Police were occasionally called in to disperse clashing groups of viewers. The movie became less about art and more about ideology. Today, Caligari is celebrated as one of cinema's earliest masterpieces, often cited as the grandfather of horror and psychological thrillers. But in 1920, it was treated as dangerous, proof that even a black-and-white silent film could strike fear into the heart of those in power. Natural Born Killers, 1994. Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers wasn't just controversial, it was accused of inspiring actual crimes. The film followed a young couple on a killing spree, presented through a dizzying mix of media styles and satire. Some hailed it as genius, others said it glorified brutality. The public reaction was explosive. In France, a screening erupted into a full-on riot, with fights breaking out inside the theater. In the UK, critics demanded bans and politicians debated its dangers. Across the US, protests organized outside cinemas, and some theaters refused to screen it at all. The controversy didn't stop there. The movie was later cited in lawsuits claiming it inspired copycat violence, sparking national debates about whether filmmakers should be held responsible for real-world crimes. Stone defended his vision, saying it was a critique of how media glamorizes violence. But for many viewers, that line was too thin. Walkouts were common, as audiences either couldn't stomach the chaos on screen or were too unsettled by its dark humor. Yet, the film's notoriety only grew. Like the Outlaw decades before, the outrage became part of its identity. In the end, Natural Born Killers showed how modern films could provoke not just discomfort, but widespread panic about their influence. It was a reminder that even in the 1990s, cinema could still send governments, critics, and audiences into full meltdown. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick didn't just make a movie with A Clockwork Orange, he detonated a cultural time bomb. From the opening scenes of Alex and his gang committing brutal acts set to classical music, audiences were polarized. Some were mesmerized by Kubrick's stylized vision, while others were horrified. The backlash was immediate. Walkouts were common during the first week of release. Critics accused the film of glamorizing youth violence. In Britain, politicians demanded it be pulled from theaters, warning it could corrupt teenagers. After a series of copycat crimes made headlines, the pressure reached Kubrick himself. Facing public outrage and even threats to his family, Kubrick asked Warner Bros. To withdraw the movie entirely from circulation in the UK. For decades, it couldn't be shown legally there. Elsewhere, government stepped in with heavy censorship. In Ireland and South Africa, it was outright banned. In the US, audiences either hailed it as genius or fled in disgust at the violent imagery. Few films have ever been so divisive. Today, A Clockwork Orange is a classic, studied in film schools for its questions about free will and social control. But in the early 70s, it wasn't a classroom discussion, it was a national panic, the kind of film that had authorities fearing art could literally change behavior. Triumph of the Will, 1935. Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will is one of the most technically impressive documentaries ever made, and one of the most dangerous. It captured a massive political rally with sweeping crane shots, dramatic lighting, and precision editing. The result was a hypnotic spectacle designed to glorify a regime. Outside Germany, screenings caused outrage. In the US, protests broke out whenever it played. Jewish groups and anti-fascist organizations called for bans, and in some cases, violence erupted outside theaters. In France and the UK, government officials debated whether allowing the film was tantamount to spreading enemy propaganda. The film was ultimately banned in many countries, but not before sparking riots and fierce public fights. What made it so unsettling wasn't just what it showed, but how it showed it. Riefenstahl elevated propaganda into art, and audiences could feel the manipulative power coursing through every frame. Critics feared it could sway people simply by dazzling them with visuals. Today, historians study it as a chilling reminder of cinema's ability to influence thought. But in 1935, Triumph of the Will wasn't just a film. It was treated like a weapon, and the angry reactions it provoked proved people were right to be afraid. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. Martin Scorsese wasn't trying to create chaos when he directed The Last Temptation of Christ. But when the movie hit theaters, the fallout was immediate and worldwide. Based on a novel that reimagined the inner struggles of its central figure, the film was met with outrage. In the US, theaters showing the film were surrounded by protesters. Some screenings had to be shut down due to bomb threats. In Paris, demonstrators hurled firebombs at a cinema, injuring dozens. Other countries banned it outright, sparking heated debates in parliaments and newspapers. Walkouts were common, and in some cities, the mere announcement of a showing triggered massive demonstrations. Scorsese defended the film as a work of imagination, not history. But the nuance was lost in the noise. For many, the film represented a line that should never have been crossed. The controversy was so intense that Universal Pictures faced boycotts, and theater owners reported threats from angry groups demanding the film be pulled. Decades later, it's remembered less for its artistry and more for the chaos it unleashed. Few films have ever caused such an international uproar, turning cinemas into battlegrounds for culture and belief. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. When Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde premiered, audiences weren't prepared for its level of graphic violence. The stylish crime drama about two outlaws on the run looked like a typical Hollywood film until the bullets started flying. The final shootout, where Bonnie and Clyde are riddled with gunfire in slow motion, left audiences shocked. People gasped, cried, or stormed out in disgust. Some critics called it sick and accused Penn of making murder glamorous. The backlash reached Capitol Hill, where lawmakers debated whether Hollywood had gone too far with blood and violence. But here's the twist. Younger audiences loved it. For them, it was daring, fresh, and brutally honest. Generational divides over the movie turned screenings into shouting matches, with older viewers denouncing it as trash and students hailing it as revolutionary. The uproar paid off. The controversy only boosted ticket sales, and Bonnie and Clyde became a turning point for Hollywood. It ushered in a new era of gritty realism, but not without sparking one of the most intense audience reactions of its time. The Passion of the Christ, 2004. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake. From the moment it premiered, audiences had visceral reactions. Some fainted during its unflinching depictions of brutality. Others stormed out, unable to watch the extended torture scenes. In South America, screenings reportedly erupted into riots between groups who interpreted the film in wildly different ways. In the Middle East, governments debated banning it outright, fearing unrest. In the US, theaters had to manage both sold-out crowds and picket lines at the same time. It became less about the movie itself and more about the chaos orbiting around it. Critics were deeply divided. Some praised its realism, while others called it exploitation. The split was so sharp that conversations about the film dominated headlines for weeks. Walkouts were constant, yet ticket sales soared, proving controversy can fuel success. In the end, The Passion of the Christ didn't just tell a story, it created one of its own. It showed that even in the 21st century, a film could spark arguments, protests, and government action on a global scale. From silent epics that sparked riots to modern blockbusters that triggered bans, these films prove one thing. Movies don't just sit quietly on a screen. They can ignite protests, start fights, or even drag governments into the mess. Which of these would you have braved all the way through, and which would have sent you running for the exit? Drop your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic chaos.